24 hours ago, I was about to lose my house to a corrupt HOA board. Today, I own them. I'm standing in the exact same driveway where I got served those foreclosure papers, my diesel truck engine still ticking from the drive home. And let me tell you something. The only thing better than sweet revenge is legal revenge that destroys your enemies completely. See, they thought they could crush a blue-collar electrician with fancy legal words and intimidation tactics. Miranda Ashworth, our HOA president, actually told me I didn't belong in a nicer neighborhood. Big mistake, lady. Huge mistake. Crunch, crunch, crunch. That's the sound of my work boots on the same gravel where she stood gloating about stealing my home. Now I'm holding the deed to her house. What would you do if your neighbors tried to steal your home using made-up rules and corrupt lawyers? Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And have you ever dealt with HOA bullies who think they're untouchable? Stick around, because what I discovered buried in their own paperwork didn't just save my house, it exposed a $1 million fraud scheme that sent 3 people to federal prison. My name's Garrett Blackwood, and 15 years ago I bought a half-acre lot in what would become Willowbrook Estates, just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. Back then, it was mostly empty fields and a few scattered houses. The developer was going bankrupt, selling lots cheap to anyone with cash. I had cash, life insurance money from when my wife Sarah lost her battle with cancer, 26 years of marriage, gone in 18 months of chemo and hospital bills. The doctor said I should take time to grieve, but grief doesn't pay the bills, and sitting around feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to honor Sarah's memory. So I bought that lot and spent every weekend for 2 years building our dream house with my own hands. Sarah had sketched it out on napkins during her final weeks, a simple ranch with a big kitchen window facing east, workshop space for my electrical business, and room for the grandkids we'd never have. The smell of sawdust and the bite of winter air through unfinished walls kept me sane those first months. Every wire I ran, every outlet I installed, every piece of trim I cut, it was therapy. My neighbors thought I was crazy, working from dawn to dusk every Saturday and Sunday, but that house saved my life. When I finally moved in, the subdivision was maybe half built. No HOA yet, no covenants, no restrictions, just neighbors helping neighbors and everyone minding their own business. My work truck, a beat-up Ford with ladders and electrical supplies, sat in my driveway where it belonged. Then Miranda Ashworth moved in. 3 years ago, this woman shows up in a white BMW that probably cost more than most people make in a year. Perfect blonde hair, perfect manicured nails, perfect fake smile. Within 6 months, she'd gotten herself elected HOA president on a platform of improving property values and maintaining community standards. The first violation letter arrived on a Tuesday. The sound of her designer heels clicking on my front porch still makes my skin crawl. She handed me that glossy piece of cardstock, heavy paper designed to intimidate, with her overpowering perfume making my eyes water. "Commercial vehicles aren't permitted in driveways," she announced, not even bothering with small talk. "It's in the covenants." I told her I'd never signed any covenants. I bought my lot before the HOA existed. Her smile got colder. "The covenants run with the land, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps you should have read them before you built." The way she said built made it sound like I'd constructed a meth lab instead of a beautiful home. The violations escalated fast. My truck, my workshop shed, the basketball hoop my nephew left behind. $50 fines became $100 fines became $500 penalties. Every letter came with that same condescending tone and Miranda's personal signature in blood-red ink. When I confronted her at the mailbox one morning, her response chilled me to the bone. "Some people just don't belong in nicer neighborhoods, Garrett. Maybe it's time you realize that." The foreclosure notice arrived by certified mail on a Friday afternoon. $47,000 in accumulated fines and fees. 30 days to pay or face foreclosure. My mortgage was nearly paid off. I owed maybe 60 grand on a house worth 380, but this piece of paper said they could take it all. I read it 3 times before it sank in. How does parking your work truck in your own driveway turn into losing your house? But there it was, in tiny print at the bottom of those original HOA documents. Unpaid fines and fees constitute a lien against the property, enforceable through foreclosure proceedings. When I called Miranda, she didn't even pretend to be sympathetic. "You should have read the fine print, Garrett. Due diligence is part of homeownership." That night, sitting in Sarah's kitchen looking out that east-facing window she'd dreamed about, I made a decision. They wanted a fight. They were about to get one they'd never forget. Miranda wasn't content to wait 30 days for her victory. Within a week of sending that foreclosure notice, she called an emergency board meeting to accelerate the timeline. Apparently, my work truck constituted an immediate threat to property values that required urgent action. The sound of her fake, concerned voice at the neighborhood coffee klatch made my stomach turn. "We simply cannot allow one person's defiance to destroy everyone's investment," she told the other ladies, stirring her latte with perfectly manicured fingers. "Sometimes tough love is necessary. But here's the thing about bullies. They usually don't know the law as well as they think they do. I spent that entire weekend at my kitchen table with my laptop diving deep into Oklahoma HOA statutes. Sarah always said I was stubborn as a mule when someone tried to push me around, and dead wives don't lie. What I discovered made my blood boil and my confidence soar at the same time. Oklahoma law requires a minimum 30-day notice period for HOA foreclosures. No exceptions, no emergency provisions. Miranda's accelerated 14-day timeline was illegal as hell. Monday morning, I drove to the county courthouse with a folder full of legal templates I'd downloaded and printed. The filing fee for an emergency injunction was $300, money I couldn't really spare, but cheaper than losing my house. I represented myself, which probably looked pathetic to the lawyers in their expensive suits, but desperation makes you brave. Knowledge nugget: most HOA foreclosure attempts violate basic due process requirements because board members don't actually understand the laws they're trying to enforce. Takeaway: when facing HOA foreclosure, always verify their timeline compliance. It's often their weakest point. Judge Morrison looked over my paperwork and Miranda's rush job for maybe 5 minutes before ruling. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said, his voice carrying that tone judges use when they're about to embarrass someone, "did your board consult with counsel before attempting to circumvent state law?" Miranda's face went from pale to red to purple in about 10 seconds. "Your Honor, we were simply trying to protect the community's interests." "By violating the defendant's due process rights?" The judge granted my 30-day extension and ordered the HOA to pay my filing fees. Outside the courthouse, Miranda's heels clicked furiously on the marble floor as she stormed past me without a word. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to think maybe I could fight these people after all. Maybe blue-collar stubbornness could beat white-collar corruption. But Miranda Ashworth didn't become HOA president by accepting defeat gracefully. 2 days later, a city code enforcement officer showed up at my door. "Anonymous tip," he said, "concerns about unpermitted electrical work." The smell of his coffee mixed with my mounting dread as he poked around my workshop with his clipboard and measuring tape. He found exactly one violation: a 220-volt outlet I'd installed in my garage 8 years ago without pulling a city permit. $15 permit, $15,000 fine for doing the work without it, plus potential suspension of my contractor's license. Through my kitchen window, I could see Miranda standing in her own kitchen, arms crossed, watching the inspection with barely concealed satisfaction. Her smile could have powered my house for a week. The inspector handed me his report with an apologetic shrug. "Nothing personal, Mr. Blackwood. Just doing my job." But we both knew who'd made that anonymous phone call. And we both knew this was just the beginning. That night, I sat in Sarah's chair looking out at Miranda's house, her windows glowing warm and smug in the darkness. She thought she was so clever, attacking me from multiple directions, using the system against itself. What she didn't know was that I was just getting started with my own research. And unlike her rush job with the foreclosure, I was going to do this right. The crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked to my mailbox the next morning sounded different somehow. Not defeated anymore. Determined. Miranda's next move was pure genius. Evil genius, but genius nonetheless. She convinced the other 3 board members to approve an emergency special assessment of $5,000 per household for urgent community improvements. Road repairs, landscaping upgrades, security enhancements, all very official sounding until you realize the real purpose was generating a war chest to destroy me legally. The emergency community meeting happened in her backyard, naturally. Acrid smoke from citronella candles burned my eyes as neighbors whispered among themselves, shooting nervous glances in my direction. Miranda played the victim perfectly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as she explained how one difficult resident was forcing expensive legal action on everyone. "I never wanted it to come to this," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. But when someone threatens the safety and property values of our entire community, sometimes we have to make hard choices. Threatened safety? I'd never even raised my voice to the woman. But 3 neighbors nodded along, and Mrs. Peterson from 2 streets over actually crossed to the other side of the road when she saw me getting my mail the next day. What really burned me up was the exemption clause buried in the fine print. Board members' properties owned through LLCs were exempt from the special assessment due to business classification differences. Convenient how Miranda and her cronies wouldn't be paying a dime of their own legal fees. But here's where being an electrician comes in handy. We're trained to follow paper trails, trace circuits back to their source, and find the one loose connection that brings down the whole system. I spent the next 3 days at the county recorder's office, pulling every document related to Willowbrook Estates from the very beginning. The smell of old paper and musty filing cabinets reminded me of my grandfather's basement, where he kept decades of electrical code books. Same methodical patience, same attention to detail. Only this time, instead of wiring diagrams, I was following money trails and legal documents. That's when I hit the jackpot. Knowledge nugget. Always verify an HOA's legal standing before paying any fines. Many associations operate without proper incorporation or let their legal status expire. Takeaway. An unincorporated HOA has no legal authority to foreclose on property or levy binding assessments. The original Willowbrook Estates HOA was incorporated in 1987 with a 20-year term. Basic math. 20 years from 1987 equals 2007. The HOA legally ceased to exist 16 years ago, and nobody had bothered to renew the incorporation papers. Miranda had been collecting illegal fees, issuing invalid violations, and threatening foreclosure with the legal authority of a neighborhood kid selling lemonade without a permit. Every letter she'd sent me demanding payment was signed evidence of her fraud. I photocopied everything twice, stored the originals in my fireproof safe, and mailed copies to my lawyer cousin in Oklahoma City. The paper felt different in my hands now, not intimidating legal documents, but evidence of a crime. But Miranda wasn't done escalating. Her next attack came through a fancy Oklahoma City law firm, Pemberton, Klein & Associates. 60-page lawsuit claiming I owed $63,000 in accumulated violations and enforcement costs. They attempted to place a lien on my house through some back-channel legal maneuvering that probably would have worked on someone who didn't know their HOA had been legally dead for over a decade. The process server found me under the hood of my truck, wrench in hand, diesel engine grease under my fingernails. He looked apologetic handing over the lawsuit. Even he could tell this was overkill for a parking violation dispute. That night, someone slashed my truck tires. Both sides, clean cuts that meant I couldn't even limp to the tire shop. Security camera caught footsteps around 2 a.m., but the angle wasn't good enough to identify faces. Anonymous flyers appeared on doorsteps the next morning. Neighborhood property values at risk. One bad apple spoils the bunch. My mailbox got spray painted with "Move Out" in bright red letters that looked suspiciously like the color of ink Miranda used for her violation notices. But here's what she didn't understand about small-town electricians. We talked to each other. My buddy Jake from the next county over mentioned a similar case in Broken Arrow where an HOA president got arrested for foreclosure fraud. Same law firm, same tactics, same outcome. Except that guy was behind bars. The pieces were falling into place, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't the one scrambling to keep up. Miranda thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to find out I'd been playing chess all along. Just when I thought Miranda couldn't sink any lower, she found a new level of evil that took my breath away. She discovered that my late wife Sarah had owned 40% of our house, standard Oklahoma law for married couples, and decided to attack my grief directly. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning the same day Sarah would have turned 58. Estate irregularities and ownership disputes was the official title. But what it really said was that Miranda questioned whether I had legal right to the house Sarah and I built together with our own hands and her life insurance money. She'd somehow tracked down Sarah's estranged sister Rebecca in Phoenix, a woman who hadn't spoken to Sarah in 15 years after some family drama about their mother's will. The lawsuit claimed the probate wasn't handled properly and that Rebecca deserved a share of the house value. The cruelest part? Miranda had the audacity to call Sarah's memory an inconvenient legal complication in one of the court filings. My hands literally shook reading those words. The sound of our wedding song playing on my workshop radio that afternoon nearly broke me completely. But grief makes you dangerous when you've got nothing left to lose. And Miranda had just crossed a line that turned my sadness into pure, focused rage. I spent that entire weekend at the Tulsa County Law Library pulling every case file I could find on Pemberton, Klein and Associates. The musty smell of old legal books reminded me of Sarah's college textbooks. She'd gone back to school for accounting before she got sick. She would have been proud watching me dig through contract law and ethics violations with the same stubborn determination she'd shown with her homework. What I found was better than gold. 3 separate cases where Pemberton, Klein had manufactured property disputes for profit. A 2019 public reprimand from the Oklahoma Bar Association for pursuing frivolous litigation with intent to harass. 2 former clients who'd filed malpractice suits claiming the firm deliberately prolonged cases to rack up billable hours. Knowledge nugget: always research your opponent's lawyers before engaging. Their track record reveals their tactics and can provide ammunition for your defense. Takeaway: unethical law firms often have patterns of misconduct that can be used to discredit their current actions. But the real treasure came from an insurance audit I found buried in the county clerk's filing system. The Willowbrook HOA's master insurance policy explicitly excluded coverage for any legal actions taken without proper board authorization. Since the HOA hadn't legally existed since 2007, every lawsuit Miranda had filed violated their coverage terms. The insurance company could cancel the policy and sue for fraud recovery. More importantly, every board member would be personally liable for all legal costs, including my attorney fees and damages. They had no idea they were on the hook for potentially hundreds of thousands in personal liability. While I was building my legal case, Miranda's sabotage campaign went into overdrive. Someone called the electric company claiming a gas leak near my meter. Convenient timing during a city inspection. The power went out right as the inspector was checking my workshop permits, making me look incompetent and unprepared. 3 separate false police reports appeared claiming I was harassing neighbors. Walking to my mailbox became loitering. Working in my garage after 6 p.m. became disturbing the peace. The officers who responded were apologetic but had to follow up on complaints. The worst came when I discovered Miranda had somehow contacted the VA about my disability benefits, filing completely fabricated complaints about me threatening federal employees. 28 years of military and electrical service, and she was trying to destroy my reputation with lies. The local newspaper ran a planted story about a dangerous contractor terrorizing quiet subdivision without bothering to fact-check any of Miranda's claims. My phone started ringing with customers canceling electrical jobs they'd already scheduled. But Miranda made one crucial mistake in her escalation. She got her teenage son involved. I came home Thursday evening to find my workshop broken into, tools scattered across the concrete floor, wire spools unrolled and tangled. My security camera caught everything. Miranda's 16-year-old son Tyler and 2 of his friends climbing through my workshop window, laughing as they trashed equipment worth thousands of dollars. The police response was predictable. Boys being boys, probably just a prank. You should handle this civilly. That's when I realized the legal system wasn't going to protect me from these people. I needed bigger weapons, and fortunately, I'd just spent 3 weeks learning exactly where to find them. The crunch of broken glass under my boots as I cleaned up my workshop sounded different now. Not the sound of defeat, the sound of a man who'd finally run out of patience with playing by rules that only applied to him. Miranda wanted to escalate? Fine. But the next move was going to be mine, and she wasn't going to see it coming until it was way too late. Everything changed when my electrician buddy Jake called me from Broken Arrow with news that made my coffee taste like victory. "Hey Garrett, remember that HOA president I mentioned? Miranda what's-her-face? Well, guess who just got perp walked out of her fancy office in handcuffs?" Turns out the Broken Arrow case wasn't just similar to mine. It was identical. Same law firm, same foreclosure scheme, same shell company buying houses at rigged auctions. Only difference was their Miranda, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, had already stolen $400,000 before someone caught on. I spent the next morning at the courthouse pulling public records on Walsh's case, and what I found made my electrician's brain start connecting circuits in ways that should have scared me. This wasn't random greed. This was a systematic operation running across multiple Oklahoma subdivisions. The smell of fresh coffee from the courthouse vending machine couldn't mask my growing excitement as I laid out documents across a conference table. Phone records showed Walsh had been in regular contact with Miranda. Bank records showed suspicious wire transfers between their shell companies. Most damning of all, both women had used identical violation letter templates, right down to the same typos. Miranda hadn't just been harassing me for parking violations. She'd been running a foreclosure scam designed to steal houses from working-class homeowners who couldn't afford to fight back legally. Here's how the scheme worked. Target blue-collar neighborhoods with older residents or single homeowners. Manufacture violations using expired or invalid HOA authority. Pile on fines and fees until foreclosure becomes inevitable. Use shell companies to bid pennies on the dollar at rigged auctions. Flip the stolen houses for massive profit. Split proceeds with the law firm. Knowledge nugget. Properties sold before HOA incorporation often retain exemption rights that can void years of accumulated violations. Takeaway. Always check the original subdivision documents. Your lot might never have been subject to HOA authority in the first place. Miranda's shell company, Willowbrook Property Solutions, was already registered to bid on my house at the upcoming foreclosure auction. She had contractors lined up, buyers waiting, financing arranged, expected profit from stealing my $380,000 house and selling it for $100,000 at her own auction, $280,000. But the banking connection was what really made my blood boil. Miranda's husband worked at First National Bank, the same bank handling the foreclosure proceedings. Federal banking regulations strictly prohibit employees from accessing information about properties their spouses are trying to acquire. Every document he'd reviewed, every conversation he'd had about my case, constituted wire fraud and insider trading violations. The paper trail was beautiful in its completeness. Miranda had documented her own crimes with the same obsessive attention to detail she'd used to harass me. Every violation letter, every board meeting minute, every financial transaction, all evidence of a conspiracy to commit mail fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering. My phone started buzzing with calls from other victims as word spread through the small network of electricians, plumbers, and contractors who worked these subdivisions. Same story, different neighborhoods. Arbitrary violations, rushed foreclosures, mysterious shell companies swooping in at the last minute. 23 separate homeowners across 7 subdivisions. Miranda and her co-conspirators had stolen over $1.2 million in the past 3 years, and they were just getting started. But here's what really made me smile as I organized evidence in my fireproof safe that night. Miranda thought she was so clever hiding behind legal technicalities and intimidation tactics. What she didn't realize was that every single one of those legal technicalities could be turned against her like a weapon. The original Willowbrook documents contained a developer control clause that exempted my lot from HOA authority permanently. Not only were all her violations invalid, they were evidence of intentional fraud. Every letter she'd sent demanding money was a federal crime. And the beautiful part? She'd signed every single one personally, in that blood-red ink she thought made her look so authoritative. 23 pieces of evidence, each carrying up to 20 years in federal prison. I'd gone from victim to prosecutor, and Miranda Ashworth had no idea the tables had just completely turned. The war room smelled like fresh coffee and righteous anger. My kitchen table disappeared under stacks of legal documents, financial records, and evidence binders as I assembled the team that would take down Miranda's criminal empire. First recruit was Jake Morrison, my electrician buddy who'd tipped me off about the Broken Arrow case. Jake brought more than just moral support. He'd worked in 6 of the 7 subdivisions where Miranda's scheme operated and contractors talk. He knew which homeowners had been targeted, which violations seemed suspicious, and most importantly, which neighbors might be willing to fight back. "This woman's been stealing houses like she's collecting baseball cards," Jake said, spreading photos across my counter. "Mrs. Patterson in Creek Valley lost her place last year. 84 years old, lived there 30 years, got foreclosed over a garden gnome violation. A garden gnome, Garrett. Betty Chen became my secret weapon. Retired paralegal, sharp as a tack, and mad as hell about HOA abuse after watching her own neighborhood get destroyed by similar tactics. Betty understood legal research better than most lawyers, and she worked for free because she believed in justice. Honey," she told me over coffee at the Denny's on Highway 169, "what you've uncovered here isn't just fraud. This is RICO territory, racketeering, conspiracy, pattern crimes. Federal prosecutors love cases like this because they're career makers." Knowledge nugget. Document everything when fighting organized fraud. Patterns prove intent in federal court, and RICO charges can multiply penalties exponentially. Takeaway: what looks like individual harassment often reveals systematic criminal enterprises when you dig deep enough. The media angle came through Marcus Williams, a young reporter at Channel 8 who was hungry for a corruption story that could make his career. Marcus understood something crucial about modern justice. Sometimes you need public pressure to force prosecutors into action. "We're not just exposing one corrupt HOA president," Marcus explained during our first planning session. "We're showing viewers how this scam works so they can protect themselves. Education and entertainment. That's what makes stories go viral." Detective Tom Bradley from the County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Unit completed our unlikely alliance. Tom had been investigating real estate fraud for 15 years, and Miranda's operation fit patterns he'd seen before. What made him valuable wasn't just his badge, it was his understanding of how to build federal cases that stick. Our strategy sessions felt like planning a military campaign. Betty handled the legal research, tracking down precedents and filing procedures. Marcus prepared the media blitz, scripting interviews and organizing document releases for maximum impact. Tom coordinated with federal investigators, ensuring our evidence met prosecution standards. The financial investigation revealed Miranda's true scope of theft. Shell Company bank records showed $1.2 million in suspicious deposits over 3 years. Property records revealed 4 investment properties she'd purchased at her own foreclosure auctions. Tax records showed massive unreported income that would make the IRS very interested. My job was playing the defeated victim while secretly recording everything. Miranda's biggest weakness was her ego. She couldn't resist gloating about her victories, especially to neighbors who she thought were safely under her control. The coffee shop meetings with Marcus taught me media strategy I never thought an electrician would need. "When you're on camera, stick to facts and let emotion show naturally," he coached me. Viewers connect with authentic anger, but they tune out if you seem crazy or vengeful. Technical preparations moved on multiple fronts simultaneously. Betty filed ethics complaints against Pemberton, Klein and Associates, triggering automatic case reviews that would freeze their operations. Insurance fraud reports went to the State Insurance Commission. Federal banking complaints about Miranda's husband landed on the right desks at the office of the comptroller. The trap we set was elegant in its simplicity. Let Miranda think she'd won, let the foreclosure proceed as scheduled, gather final evidence of the auction rigging, then spring everything at once when she was most vulnerable and overconfident. Community outreach revealed the true scale of victim damage. Our quiet phone tree connected 23 families across 7 subdivisions who'd been targeted by identical schemes. Conference calls filled with voices sharing heartbreakingly similar stories. Elderly widows, disabled veterans, single mothers, all targeted because Miranda's research identified them as unlikely to fight back effectively. But Betty's nuclear option discovery topped everything else. Miranda had never actually passed the Oklahoma bar exam. She'd been practicing law illegally for 8 years, which automatically voided every legal action she'd ever taken and upgraded her crimes from fraud to felony unauthorized practice. The smell of fresh printer ink filled my workshop as we prepared evidence packets for prosecutors, reporters, and insurance investigators. Each manila folder contained enough documentation to destroy Miranda's life completely. Financial records, recorded conversations, witness statements, photographic evidence. That Friday night, exactly 1 week before the scheduled foreclosure auction, I sat in Sarah's kitchen looking out at Miranda's house where warm lights glowed in every window. She had no idea that 24 hours from now, those lights would be evidence in a federal criminal investigation. The crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked to check my mailbox sounded different now. Not nervous or angry anymore. Confident. Ready. Justice was coming to Willowbrook Estates, and Miranda Ashworth was about to discover that sometimes the quiet guy who just wants to park his truck in his own driveway turns out to be the most dangerous enemy you could possibly make. Miranda's victory lap was nauseating to watch. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for Friday morning at 10 a.m. sharp, and her shell company, Willowbrook Property Solutions, was mysteriously the only registered bidder. What a coincidence. She'd already started showing my house to potential buyers before she even owned it, parading well-dressed couples through my front yard like she was conducting tours of her personal museum. The sound of her heels clicking on my sidewalk while pointing out improvement opportunities made my teeth clench, but I played the defeated victim perfectly. Sometimes people just need to learn their place, I heard her tell one couple as they stood in my driveway. This neighborhood has standards, and we enforce them. Her bragging to the neighbors became increasingly bold as the auction approached. Mrs. Peterson heard her at the grocery store explaining how she'd cleaned up an eyesore that was dragging down everyone's property values. At the bank, she'd told the teller about her exciting new investment opportunity that would net a six-figure profit. But Miranda's arrogance was creating evidence faster than I could document it. Every conversation, every gloating comment, every smug prediction about my inevitable defeat, all recorded by the surveillance equipment Jake had helped me install throughout the subdivision. Her desperate sabotage attempts escalated as she sensed something might be wrong. First, she tried to hack my email account, hoping to discover what I was planning. When that failed, she convinced the remaining board members to file a restraining order claiming I was harassing and intimidating her. The most pathetic attempt came when someone planted a baggie of marijuana in my truck and called in an anonymous tip about a neighborhood drug dealer. Fortunately, Jake had spotted the setup and removed the evidence before the police arrived. The officer who responded looked embarrassed, having to explain they'd received a complaint about suspicious activity that apparently didn't exist. Meanwhile, the insurance bombshell I'd been waiting for finally exploded. The master insurance company discovered Miranda's pattern of fraudulent claims and immediately canceled the HOA policy, demanding $800,000 in reimbursement for improperly covered legal actions. The panic was beautiful to watch. Board members started receiving certified letters demanding personal payment for costs they'd never authorized and didn't understand. 2 of them resigned immediately and hired separate attorneys, finally realizing they'd been unwitting accomplices in a criminal conspiracy. Betty Chen stepped into the power vacuum as interim HOA president, her first official act being to demand a complete audit of all financial records. Miranda's attempts to block the audit only made her look more guilty to neighbors who were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. The federal investigation accelerated when the FBI Financial Crimes Unit officially opened a file based on our RICO complaint. A bank examiner arrived unannounced at First National, sending Miranda's husband into panic mode. His suspension pending investigation lasted exactly 3 hours before he was terminated for potential conflicts of interest. The sound of Miranda screaming at the bank president over the phone carried across 2 yards, something about ruining her family and destroying her reputation. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with wire strippers. Community fractures appeared as neighbors finally started connecting dots they'd ignored for months. Anonymous letters defending me appeared on doorsteps, calling for investigation of criminal HOA leadership. The same people who'd avoided eye contact with me last month were suddenly waving from their windows. My final evidence collection went better than I'd dared hope. Security footage showed Miranda personally vandalizing my mailbox at 2 a.m. A recorded phone call captured her admitting the foreclosure was primarily a business opportunity rather than community enforcement. Financial documents proved her shell company fraud beyond any reasonable doubt. But the crown jewel was witness statements from 23 separate victims across multiple counties, all describing identical tactics, identical threats, identical outcomes. The pattern was so clear even a first-year law student could prosecute successfully. Thursday night before the auction, I sat in my workshop organizing final evidence packets while classic rock played softly on the radio Sarah had given me for our 10th anniversary. The smell of electrical tape and machine oil mixed with anticipation as I prepared for the most important performance of my life. Tomorrow morning, Miranda would walk into that courthouse expecting to steal my house for pennies on the dollar. Instead, she'd walk into a carefully orchestrated trap that would destroy her criminal empire and send her to federal prison for the next decade. The manila envelopes containing her life's destruction sat neatly stacked on my workbench, each one labeled with evidence categories: financial fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, RICO violations, unauthorized practice of law, insurance fraud, banking violations. 24 hours from now, Miranda Ashworth would discover that sometimes the quiet electrician who just wants to park his truck in peace turns out to be the most dangerous enemy a criminal could possibly choose. The crunch of gravel under my boots as I locked up the workshop for the night sounded like a countdown timer ticking toward justice. With less than 12 hours until the foreclosure auction, Miranda pulled out every dirty trick in her playbook. She hired a crisis management firm from Oklahoma City, the kind that specializes in making scandals disappear for politicians and corrupt executives. Their first move was planting a newspaper story painting me as a disgruntled contractor with a history of workplace disputes. Complete lies, of course, but the timing was calculated to poison any potential jury pool if this went to trial. The article quoted anonymous sources claiming I'd threatened multiple neighbors and had anger management issues stemming from military service. Using my dead wife and my veteran status as weapons, that crossed every line I had left. The crisis team also threatened Channel 8 with a defamation lawsuit if they aired Marcus's investigation. "Mr. Williams," their lawyer wrote, "your station will face significant financial consequences if you broadcast unsubstantiated allegations against our client." Classic intimidation tactics designed to silence the media. But Miranda's most desperate move was attempting to bribe the county clerk to lose the original HOA documents that proved her organization had been legally dead since 2007. She offered $2,000 cash for a simple filing error that would make my evidence disappear. Knowledge nugget. Attempting to destroy or alter public records is a federal crime that carries mandatory minimum sentences, even for first-time offenders. Takeaway. Corrupt officials always make their biggest mistakes when they panic and try to cover up evidence. What Miranda didn't know was that County Clerk Janet Morrison had been recording government interactions since a corruption scandal 3 years earlier. Every word of Miranda's bribery attempt was captured on digital audio and immediately forwarded to the district attorney's office. The additional felony charges were filed Friday morning at 8 a.m., exactly 2 hours before the foreclosure auction. Bribery of a public official, attempted destruction of government records, obstruction of justice. Each charge carried 5 to 10 years in federal prison. My media blitz launched simultaneously. Marcus aired the first investigative report on Channel 8's morning show, HOA Foreclosure Fraud, How One Woman Stole Millions from Oklahoma Families. The phone lines at the station flooded with similar victim stories from across the state before the segment even finished. I appeared on camera with my evidence binders, speaking directly to other homeowners who might be facing similar harassment. "Don't let them intimidate you with fancy legal language," I said, looking straight into the lens. "These people are criminals, and criminals always make mistakes when you force them into the light." The federal investigation reached critical mass when the IRS opened a tax evasion case. Miranda's shell company had never reported income from the foreclosure scheme. $1.2 million in unreported profits meant she owed approximately $340,000 in back taxes and penalties, plus criminal charges for intentional evasion. Asset freeze orders prevented her from selling any properties or transferring funds. The white BMW, the designer clothes, the fancy lawyer, all funded by stolen money that now belonged to her victims in restitution. The community rebellion was swift and complete. An emergency neighborhood meeting drew 67 homeowners demanding Miranda's immediate resignation. The vote wasn't even close. 4 board members voted to remove her, with only her husband voting in opposition. Betty Chen was elected permanent president by acclamation, her first official act being to void all of Miranda's illegal violations and restore my property rights. The fraudulent foreclosure was canceled, my accumulated fines declared null and void, and Miranda's shell company banned from any future community business. But Miranda's final gambit was pure desperation. Thursday night, she was caught on security cameras at her law firm's office, frantically shredding documents related to other foreclosure cases. The paper shredder jammed after 20 minutes, leaving half-destroyed evidence scattered across the floor when police arrived. Additional obstruction of justice charges were filed before she even got home. Her own lawyers fired her the next morning to avoid prosecution themselves, leaving her with an overworked public defender who'd never handled federal fraud cases. The media snowball effect exceeded our wildest expectations. Oklahoma City stations picked up the story, then regional networks, then national HOA reform organizations. Documentary filmmakers requested interview rights. Legal experts called it a landmark case for homeowner protection. The smell of fresh coffee in the TV studio green room mixed with my growing confidence as I prepared for the noon interview that would reach 500,000 viewers. Marcus coached me through final talking points. Stick to facts, let the evidence speak, remember that other victims are watching and need to know they're not alone. Miranda's complete isolation was almost pitying to watch. Neighbors openly shunned her family at the grocery store. Her own law firm issued press releases distancing themselves from her actions. Former allies publicly condemned her behavior to save their own reputations. Her husband faced bank termination and potential federal charges for insider trading. Their teenage son was suspended from school after the vandalism video went viral on social media. The perfect suburban family image she'd worked so hard to maintain crumbled in 72 hours. Friday morning, I stood in my driveway watching Miranda's house through my kitchen window as federal agents executed search warrants. The same driveway where she'd served me foreclosure papers, the same spot where she'd gloated about teaching me my place. The crunch of gravel under multiple pairs of boots sounded like justice finally arriving in Willowbrook Estates. In 6 hours, this nightmare would be over, and Miranda Ashworth would discover that some battles aren't worth winning. The Tulsa County Courthouse had never seen anything like it. By 9 a.m., 2 hours before the scheduled foreclosure auction that would never happen, the building was surrounded by news trucks, angry homeowners, and federal investigators. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with anticipation as reporters set up equipment on the courthouse steps. County Commissioner Sarah Martinez called an emergency public hearing on HOA reform after 23 victims contacted her office in a single morning. The main courtroom was standing room only, every seat filled with homeowners who'd been targeted by similar schemes, reporters scribbling notes, and federal agents quietly observing from the back rows. I walked into that courtroom carrying 3 evidence binders and 15 years of righteous anger. The click of cameras and scratch of pencils on paper followed me to the witness table where I'd sworn to tell the truth about Miranda's criminal empire. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking directly at the packed gallery, "my name is Garrett Blackwood, and I'm here to tell you how one corrupt HOA president tried to steal my house and accidentally exposed a $1 million fraud scheme that's been robbing Oklahoma families for years." The PowerPoint presentation Betty had helped me prepare was devastating in its simplicity. Timeline charts showing Miranda's escalating harassment, financial graphs proving the foreclosure scheme's profitability, maps identifying victim properties across 7 subdivisions, audio recordings of her admitting the whole thing was just business. When I played the recording of Miranda calling my late wife's memory an inconvenient legal complication, the courtroom went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming and papers rustling as people processed the casual cruelty of that statement. Commissioner Martinez leaned forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Mr. Blackwood, are you telling us that Mrs. Ashworth deliberately targeted grieving widowers and elderly homeowners because she believed they couldn't fight back effectively?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied, pulling out victim demographic charts. Average age of targeted homeowners, 62. 80% were either widowed, disabled, or single-income households. She researched vulnerability like a predator hunting prey. The room erupted in angry murmurs until the commissioner called for order. Miranda arrived 20 minutes into my testimony with her expensive attorney, the same one who'd been threatening lawsuits all week. She looked pale and hollow-eyed, her perfect hair slightly disheveled, designer clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. The confident HOA president who'd terrorized our neighborhood was gone, replaced by a desperate woman facing federal prison. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, probably telling her to stay quiet and let him handle everything. But Miranda's ego couldn't handle listening to her victims expose her crimes without defending herself. She jumped up during my explanation of the shell company fraud, her voice shrill and desperate. "This is all lies. I was protecting property values. These people don't understand community standards." The courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers as her attorney tried to pull her back into her seat. But Miranda was beyond rational thought, screaming about undesirable elements and people who don't belong while 3 news cameras recorded every word. "I built this community," she shrieked, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "I made it better. I made it worth something. And this man wants to destroy everything because he thinks rules don't apply to him." Commissioner Martinez banged her gavel for order, but Miranda kept ranting. "You want to know about fraud? I'll tell you about fraud. The fraud is letting people like him live in neighborhoods like ours. The fraud is pretending everyone deserves the same." That's when Detective Bradley stepped forward with handcuffs. "Miranda Ashworth," he announced in a voice that carried to the back of the courtroom, "you're under arrest for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit racketeering, bribery of a public official, and unauthorized practice of law." The click of handcuffs echoed through the suddenly silent room as cameras flashed like lightning. Miranda's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally terror as the reality of federal charges sank in. Her husband was arrested separately at the bank for insider trading and wire fraud. The timing was perfect. Both taken into custody simultaneously, so neither could destroy evidence or coordinate their stories. I stood up at the witness table, looking directly at the news cameras broadcasting live across Oklahoma. Miranda Ashworth thought she could steal homes from working families because we wouldn't fight back. She thought wrong. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes and felt like vindication for every sleepless night, every threatening letter, every moment I'd wondered if I was strong enough to take on the system that was supposed to protect people like me. Outside the courthouse, Marcus pushed microphones toward my face as reporters shouted questions about federal prosecution and civil lawsuits. But I kept my statement simple. This isn't just about one corrupt HOA president. This is about holding the powerful accountable when they prey on regular folks who just want to live in peace. The sound of Miranda's voice screaming, "This isn't over," from inside the police car would have been intimidating yesterday. Today it just sounded like the desperate threats of a criminal who'd finally been caught. Justice had arrived in Willowbrook Estates, and it was wearing handcuffs. 18 months later, I'm standing in the same driveway where this whole nightmare began, but everything has changed. The morning air carries the smell of fresh coffee from the community center that used to be Miranda's foreclosed house, and the sound of children laughing in the playground we built with recovered stolen funds. Miranda Ashworth was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $1.8 million in restitution to her victims. The judge called her crimes a systematic attack on the American dream of homeownership, and noted that her complete lack of remorse warranted the maximum sentence. Her law firm lost their license after 3 partners were indicted for conspiracy. Miranda's husband got 3 years in permanent banishment from the banking industry. The perfect suburban family that terrorized our neighborhood was completely destroyed by their own greed. But the real victory was watching justice work for regular people. 23 families received compensation averaging $35,000 each from recovered assets. The victim fund we established helped elderly homeowners hire attorneys, disabled veterans keep their houses, and single mothers fight back against HOA harassment across Oklahoma. Knowledge nugget. Document everything when facing HOA harassment. Photographs, recordings, financial records, and witness statements become crucial evidence if disputes escalate to litigation. Takeaway. Patterns of abuse are easier to prove than individual incidents, so connect with other victims to build stronger cases. Betty Chen transformed our HOA into a model of transparency and fairness. Monthly financial reports became mandatory, all meetings were public, and homeowners gained voting rights on major decisions. The $5,000 emergency assessment Miranda imposed was refunded with interest from her seized assets. The smell of fresh-baked cookies at our first reformed board meeting told you everything about how the neighborhood had changed. Instead of intimidation and threats, we had actual neighbors helping neighbors solve problems together. My personal healing surprised me most. The memorial garden I built for Sarah using settlement money became a gathering place where neighbors brought their troubles and found solutions. Wind chimes playing her favorite melody remind me daily that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about making communities stronger. The Oklahoma legislature passed the Homeowner Protection Act, citing our case as the primary motivation. HOAs now must carry mandatory insurance for legal actions, provide arbitration before foreclosure proceedings, and face criminal penalties for violations. It became the national model for HOA reform legislation. But life's best surprise came through shared struggle. I met Anna Richardson at a homeowner advocacy meeting in Oklahoma City, a widow who'd faced similar harassment from her HOA after her husband died. Romance bloomed over shared understanding of legal battles and late-night strategy sessions planning lawsuits. Our engagement party happened right here in Willowbrook Estates, with neighbors who'd once crossed the street to avoid me now celebrating our happiness. The texture of Anna's hand in mine felt like hope, like second chances, like proof that surviving hell makes you stronger. We're planning to build a second house on my lot for Anna's disabled son, Marcus, using accessible design principles I learned from electrical work in VA hospitals. The same neighbors who'd supported Miranda's harassment now volunteer weekend labor for construction. Sarah's fund provides $50,000 annually in scholarships for trade school students. with preference for military families and single-parent households. Every check I sign at Sarah's favorite coffee shop reminds me that good can come from fighting evil, that standing up to bullies protects future victims. The most satisfying moment came last month when Miranda's appeal was denied by the Federal Circuit Court. She'll serve every day of that 8-year sentence, and her permanent disbarment means she'll never practice law again. The woman who told me I didn't belong in nicer neighborhoods will spend the next 6 years learning about belonging in federal prison. So that's how I went from losing everything to owning the people who tried to destroy me. Miranda's foreclosure scheme collapsed like a house of cards once someone finally stood up and fought back with facts, evidence, and the kind of stubborn determination that built this country. The crunch of gravel under my boots sounds different now. Confident, peaceful, home. My work truck sits proudly in the driveway where it belongs, and every morning I thank Sarah for teaching me that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous when you push them too far. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments below. You're not alone in this fight, and there are people ready to help if you're willing to stand up for your rights. Hit that subscribe button for more David versus Goliath stories where regular people take on corrupt systems and actually win. Next week, I'll tell you about the city council member who tried to revoke my business license for exposing Miranda's crimes, and how that backfired even worse than her original foreclosure scheme. Remember, documentation beats intimidation, truth beats money, and sometimes the best revenge is just living well in the house they tried to steal.